Welcome back, everybody. So to start, I have a question for all of you. If you were to rewrite the Adam and Eve story, what fruit would they eat of?
This is so good.
I'd say kiwi.
Ooh.
Oh.
I would say an orange because that's easy to share.
Yeah, we're going to go with watermelon because it doesn't make any sense, but I love watermelon, so I don't really know how it would crack open. But
And the correct answer is a pineapple. Because, well, in the creation story, not many people would pay attention to the fruit, but because it was a pineapple, the pineapple nowadays, they have the little spikes on them.
nowadays.
So
Back then.
when Eve ate of the apple, the pineapple, when Eve ate of the pineapple, God also banished the pineapple and created the spikies so that it's harder to eat. It's like prevention, you know.
So you're telling me it used to not have the spikies?
Right. Yes. The spikies were not a thing.
The spikies.
Learn something new every day.
Yeah.
Well, let's get started as we ponder that. Welcome back to QuaranTEEN. I'm Athena.
I'm Lauren.
I'm Matt.
And I'm Branson.
He's still here.
We haven't lost him yet. He's still here. This is awesome. Before we get started, it's my cue first. I'm losing it. Before we get started, I would like to invite you guys to join AWAKEN Nation. So if you are loving what you're hearing here at QuaranTEEN or any of the podcasts with AWAKEN Catholic or any of the other awesome things that we are doing here, we ask for your prayers and also your financial support. So for as little as the cost of a cup of coffee, you could join AWAKEN Nation and just help us continue our ministry here. And if you have not done this yet, I highly suggest that you download the AWAKEN Catholic app. You can find it in the App Store or you can follow the link on the screen. It's a really cool place to have kind of that social media without the social media negativity. So if you are looking for an awesome Catholic community to meet people from all over and also get to know those that are here on the shows or those behind the scenes running AWAKEN Catholic, this is the place you want to go.
And today's episode is brought to you by Casa Bella Cleaning Service. Casa Bella is a one-stop shop for all things clean. If you live in the Northwest Ohio area, Casa Bella is the ideal option to keep your residence, commercial, or new construction clean. Casa Bella is also one of the only services in Northwest Ohio that provides deep and professional carpet cleaning. Most importantly, right now during the pandemic, keeping your home and offices clean and COVID-19 free is of the utmost importance, and it happens to be a specialty of Casa Bella. That includes doorknobs, light switches, surfaces, ATMs, everything. Get the peace of mind of knowing your home or commercial environment is professionally clean by visiting casabellacleaning.info today. And today, we are talking about free will, which is why we introed with the scene in the garden. This is another deep topic.
We're going
so much.
Like it's
With the
Holy Week
pineapple.
as we tape these, so we're just going hard.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
So I guess starting with free will, we can talk about the scene, like the garden. We can talk about Adam and Eve and how they were given a choice, right?
Yeah. Because ultimately they were given everything, right? They're given literally everything.
Yeah.
And I feel this might sound demeaning to Adam and Eve, but I feel like they're kind of toddlers, okay? Because I have two toddlers. So when I tell them like they can play with anything, but they can't touch like one thing, that's the one thing they want to touch, right? Even though they have access to everything else, they want that one thing. And so when I read it, especially as a parent now, that's kind of what I think of is like, here's everything that you could possibly ever want. Your life is going to be so perfect. Please just don't touch this thing. And of course, what happens? Eve touches the thing. And then, no, it is not Eve's fault that Adam then eats because that's not how this works. Because Adam also got to choose. He could have said no.
That's why we say Adam and Eve.
Yeah, so this is not all on Eve.
Right.
Although she took the first step, Adam took the second right there with her.
Yeah.
I mean, Eve got the pineapple, so
The pineapple.
overall.
That's true. But the spikies, I can't get over that. But so starting there is kind of where like humans like our world falls apart, right? Because of course this happens, then they're hiding from God because they realize that they're naked and they're shameful because they did the one thing that was asked of them not to do. And then they're banished, and that's, where like all the bad things come, right? Like God's like, here you go. This is everything now that's going to happen. And while like if you read the story and you don't think too deeply into it, God seems like this really like kind of harsh, evil man, right? Because he's like, here you go. Here's everything bad because you did this. But ultimately, it's kind of like a good parent, right? Like when my kid goes to touch the stove, if I don't teach him why he can't touch the stove, then like he's going to touch the stove, which is going to result in way worse things. Or, sneaking out. If you are sneaking out of your house at night and you get caught, if your parents don't do anything about that, that's kind of an issue, right? For teens, we want that. Like, we're like, yeah, my mom's so cool. No, we're not learning anything from that situation, right? So when you really dive into that story, it's really just God, like, loving us so much that he's like, well, crap, now I have to help you learn from this. Because otherwise, like, what the heck would our life be? Because it'd just be like, oh, you did that. Well, all right, don't do it again. Like, and that we don't learn from that, and we would continue to make the same mistakes. So we start there. Adam and Eve mess up real big. We're pushed out of the garden, and then it just like is like a slow moving downfall, I feel like. And the world, as like we progress, especially into our day and age, like more and more just bad things happen, and it's just crazy, right? And it's easy again for us to just want God to come in and like strike people down with lightning bolts and be like, yeah, cleanse the world, let's go, right? But sometimes I think we don't realize that one of those lightning bolts might be hitting us. And that is because of free will.
Yeah.
God doesn't do that because he loves us so much. And it's unlike, like when you read in the Bible, these stories of Old Testament versus New Testament, right? Even in the Old Testament, prophets are trying to explain how like God, the God, is different than the gods that they're so used to, right? So they are trying to explain that. And then Jesus comes and again even goes deeper, explaining how this, like, our God is different. Our Father is different. And it's hard for them to understand. So if you don't understand it, it's okay. It's fine, right? Like Christ's closest followers didn't totally get it until literally they saw him come back after he died. Then they understood, like, oh, okay, this is really happening. Cool, right? Like they were right there with him. I keep smacking my chin to this microphone. They were right there with him and still didn't understand. But it's important to know that, like, unlike those Old Testament gods that they had been worshiping out of fear more, if you listen to the stories, even if you read about these gods, right, in other like ancient religions, most people worship them out of fear, right? Like you had to worship this God because if you didn't, then your crops weren't going to grow. You have to worship this God because if you didn't, then you weren't ever going to have kids. And it wasn't out of love. And our God comes and he changes that. Like he's like, no, that's not how it's supposed to be. And I think that's why, Christ comes too, because if you read these stories in the Old Testament, without any knowledge of what's going on in the world when those were written, God does seem like this harsh kind of mean God. But then Jesus comes and he's like, wait, you guys still have it wrong. Like, let me help you even further realize how much the Lord loves you and why we have this free will. Because ultimately, like, Jesus choosing the cross was also the reflection of his love for God and his free will. He easily could have sat and prayed, and instead, like, his prayer could have been not like, let this cup pass, but God, this cup will pass me. I'm not doing this, right? Like he easily could have done that, but out of his love for God and his free will, he chose the good, right? Even if it didn't look like good to him, the good versus the lesser or the evil of that option, right? Where he could have just become our kingly king. He could have just said, nope, snapped his fingers and been sitting on a throne and been the king that they were expecting to get versus the king that God and Jesus was for us.
Yeah. So the easy answer is like God gives us free will out of love. And the Catechism actually teaches that God willed that man should be left in the hands of his own counsel. so that he might seek his creator and freely attain and fully blessed perfection on his own accord. So giving that statement by the Catechism, like, yeah, it's all out of love. He loves us so much that if you don't want to be with me, you don't need to be, you know?
Right.
That's your choice. And I think you actually, during one of our talks, you're the one that actually told me that, like, out of love, like, if somebody doesn't want to be with God in the kingdom of heaven, God's not going to force that on somebody.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. I think, like, going back to the garden, it's like, we on campus lead a Bible study that goes through the fall, right? And the question is always like, why did God have to place that tree in the garden? Couldn't he just not put that there? And yeah, like we've been talking about, like, no, love presupposes a choice, right? There's no love unless the person that you're loving has the option not to love you back, right?
Mm-hmm.
And in that sense, like Adam and Eve, like, unfortunately chose not to obey God, even though it seemed like they had a relationship with him, like they were walking with him at that point. They knew who he was, but they didn't trust him, especially in the moment of temptation. But yeah, we always have a choice, right? And that's the beautiful part about our faith is we do believe in free will. We do believe that at every moment we can turn toward God or we can turn away from God. And unfortunately, so often we turn away from God. We see that all over salvation history. There's this turning away from God in sin, this sense of exile, of kind of being sent away from the source of our, the source, God himself. Yeah. But then redemption, right? That's the most beautiful part of our faith is.
And I love that we've said that in every episode.
But
all of these suffering episodes.
It's funny though, because you'd think by now, like reading these old stories and even just looking at our world, we come to realize that, like, the easier option is to love God and to choose those options, right? Our lives become easier even with the suck if we're choosing, like, to go towards God. But for some reason in the moment, I feel like it looks better and it feels better to, like, choose the opposite, which makes it so much harder when we are trying to be more Christ-like or even to grow in our relationship with Christ, because the world makes the other choice just seems so much sweeter in the moment.
Yeah. And I think, whether you've asked this question or other people have, maybe, like, not understanding the fact, like, maybe why, like, people don't understand why he wouldn't allow everyone to just pick him instead of, like, having that choice. Right. Why they can't just be directed toward him instead of being able to make a choice. And it's kind of like what you were talking about with your kids and, like, the stove and letting them, like, figure that out. And that's because, like, God also wants us to, like, be able to learn from things and, like, make mistakes, because if we were always directed toward him, like, there would be no freedom in that. We wouldn't have that choice that we initially, like, are supposed to have.
And I think it's important too to remember, and we've talked about this when we did our Saints episode, but that the Lord chooses completely imperfect, like, little tiny people that you would not really normally notice to be the pillars and these, like, really strong saints in our faith. And so it's important to remember that, like, even if we're choosing that sweeter option in the moment over and over and over again, the Lord's not going to give up. So while he's not directing you towards him, he is still walking with you. And, like, I always think of it as, like for me, I'm really close with my mom. So I think of it as, like, times that I've disappointed her, right? And I can remember them. I can remember sitting there and my mom telling me, like, I'm not angry, I'm disappointed, which is so much worse to hear. At least for me, I don't know. But I can remember her walking with me. Now, while she didn't pick up the pieces and she didn't tell me, like, I'm going to fix this, she was right there with me and in the crap and just saying, like, I'm really sorry. And that's kind of how I think of God. I think of him when we're choosing these, like, terrible options for ourselves and we're going down that path. It's not like God just, like, sits way back and he's like, well, see ya, hopefully you come back. But he's right there with us as we make those choices. And we're, like, I always kind of think of it as, like, we're kind of slapping him in the face a little bit, like, each time. And he just sits there and he takes it and he's like, okay, what's next? Let's go. And, like, he's just hoping and praying that like that next choice is going to be the one that starts our path back to him. Even though he's with us the entire time. So like while we're choosing these, know that you can't mess up bad enough that God's going to give up on you. Like all your friends, all your family, they might be like, yeah, peace out, but God's still going to be there no matter what. Which I think ultimately is how you hear these stories of people, you know, that have, come out of, I don't want to say come out of because they still deal with it, but like, are recovering alcoholics and now are living a life on fire for Christ, right? My old youth minister was one. You hear these stories of these people that went down really bad paths and chose that sweeter fruit in the moment each time until eventually like they ran out of that sweeter option. They were at that rock bottom and it was like, well, crap, the only way up, I guess, is to pray. So here I am, Lord. And their life has turned out so much sweeter in the long run.
Right. I think there can be this, like, again, thinking about my story, I made a lot of stupid decisions in college.
That's where they're made, right? I feel like that's where it is.
Often people do that in college.
I'm in college and I can attest to it.
Matt does not make stupid decisions.
Yeah, whatever.
But again, this kind of looking back, I think that being in that rock bottom place and then having the Lord by His grace rise me up, I think that if I didn't hit that rock bottom, there's a good chance I would have just been complacent my whole life.
Yeah.
That maybe I wouldn't have seen like direct consequences of my actions. And I would have probably just kept doing them because like, well, life's not that bad, but it's not that great, but you know,
I can live with it.
I can live with it.
Right.
I don't know if there's that much more, or I'm afraid to take that step. But like you said, at rock bottom, like there's no more place to go but to turn to the Lord, to turn to a place that's like, well, let's try this out. And God always comes through.
And ultimately, when you hear of people that have chosen those sweeter fruits, they're at rock bottom, that's like what their thing is. They're like, well, what could it hurt at this point to try the Lord's option because I've already messed up so bad. And ultimately, I feel like those that have hit rock bottom have a deeper understanding of the Lord and of suffering because they've been there. So for some of us, like when we talk about suffering, you're sitting there like, I don't know if I've ever suffered. Like, I don't know, especially when you're younger. And those that have suffered and have gone through that, I think they have a deeper understanding of free will, a deeper understanding of the love of the Lord, right? Because I run into that with teens that like when they start to suffer, it hits them that like they can't, all of a sudden they just don't understand how God can love them still. While I've run into other people who have hit that rock bottom and they're still there and they're like, I know God loves me and we're going to get out of this somehow. And so I think they have a deeper understanding and part of that is they chose the harder path. So know that like if you're a Catholic that you're sitting here as we're talking about these topics and you're like, I don't think I've ever been there. Like that's okay. You can still have a great relationship with Christ and be in a place like if you don't have to suffer yet, you will at some point on this earth. But if you haven't had to do that yet, rejoice in that. Be okay with that. That's awesome. If you're going to pray for suffering, just know it's coming then. Like, let's just say that, right? It's the same with like patience when you pray for patience. Just so you know, I've been praying for patience for years. The Lord gives you kids like mine. Okay. So like, it's not, I love them dearly. Or he makes you a youth minister, right? Like it's not, he doesn't sit there and he's like, oh, here's some patience. Let me sprinkle it on. So if you're going to pray for suffering and really actually be like, I want to suffer like Christ, get ready because the Lord will provide. Okay. Like he's going to do that. But know that if you haven't suffered yet, like that's beautiful in itself and it will happen. And right now start to prepare yourself so that when that free will happens and instead of choosing that, you know, maybe that painful suffering away from Christ, you can choose the suffering leading closer to Christ. And just kind of get your weapons ready for those free will choices. Because sometimes they don't happen in high school. Sometimes they do happen in college when you're by yourself and you don't really know what you're doing, but you're trying your best or you're just enjoying life a little bit too much. Get ready and have your weapons ready so that when those free will options come up and you're ready, you can at least know that you're attempting to make what you think are the right choices leading to Christ.
Yeah, and free will is hard too. I think one of the best things that we can all do is just when those things come up where we need to choose, pray for God's will. Like, you know, like we can hear all the time, like, do God's will. And that's really true just because there is all these other outside evils that can come into play. But ultimately, like, God has a plan, and it's just how we're going to get there. And yeah, just praying for God's will to be done, as we say in the Our Father, is one of the best things we can do.
So powerful. So powerful. Well, thank you, Branson, for joining us for these
thanks so much.
Pleasure,
last 3 episodes. It's been awesome. We hope that you guys enjoyed. Hopefully something spoke to your heart, or at least intrigued you a little bit. And we invite you to come back and listen again.
See you next time.
See you guys.
Bye, y'all.
This show and all media on Awaken Catholic is made possible by the Awaken Nation and the Hallow app. The Awaken Nation is a community of people like you who support all things Awaken for as cheap as a cup of coffee a week and get access to exclusive content. Learn more by visiting awakencatholic.org/donate. Hallow is the only audio-guided Catholic prayer app focused on contemplative prayer and traditional Catholic meditation such as Lectio Divina, Daily Examen, and the Rosary. We here at Awaken all use Hallow every day and love it. To learn more or give it a try, visit hallow.app/awaken.